Okay, so the topic of my talk this morning is Ajahn Chah, and our friend Kathy gave a talk on this teacher earlier in the summer. But when we realized that we both chose him to speak on, we decided, oh well, there's plenty to say about him, so we decided to keep our idea of having two talks on this great Thai Theravada teacher. So just to recap a little about his life, he was a monk in the Thai forest tradition in the Theravada school of Buddhism, which is known also as the School of the Elders. And if you're not familiar with the distinctions, as Buddhism spread more into northern areas of Asia, a later development called Mahayana school was established in those areas, and this is the tradition that we practice in here at Maba. So the School of the Elders. When we think of elders, we often think of tradition, don't we? And elders can also seem quite conservative to younger people. And indeed, the Thai forest tradition is based on the practice of the Dhamma, which is as close as possible to the way lived and taught by the Buddha. And in fact, it's a way of life that's even older than the Buddha. Because before his time, the Buddhas that is, those who sought spiritual liberation often left the life of towns and villages and went to mountains and forest wildernesses, to places outside the influence of materialistic culture. The Buddha himself followed this tradition and encouraged his followers to do the same. And the Theravada tradition, to this day, has taken the attitude, and this is in the words of one of Ajahn Chah's students, that for better or worse, that's the way the Buddha established it, so that's the way we'll do it. But by the mid-19th century, Buddhism in Thailand had a rich variety of regional traditions and practices, but spiritual life had become somewhat corrupt. Monastic discipline had become lax, Dhamma teachings had become mixed up with other non-Buddhist traditions and religions, and almost no one practiced meditation anymore. There had also arisen an emphasis on the study of religious texts, particularly the commentaries. And a dominant teaching was that it was impossible to attain nibbana in the current age, and even impossible to attain jhana, which is meditative absorption. But the revivers of the forest tradition refused to accept this position. They were viewed as mavericks and troublemakers by the Buddhist hierarchy of the time, and this is why many of them, Ajahn Chah included, disdained many of the study monks, as they were called, of their own Theravada tradition. Instead, their refrain, that is the maverick revivalists, was, "You don't get wisdom from books." Instead, the revivers of the forest tradition emphasized lifestyle and personal experience. Simplicity and practice became the way which they saw as the true legacy of the Buddha. Kathy ended her talk with some questions that Ajahn Chah put to his disciples. These were, who are you? Why are you here? Why were you born? What can you take with you? Ajahn Chah encouraged us to ponder these questions, to try and find the answer. He promised that if we seriously asked these questions over and over, that we would become wise. So at some point in my reading of Ajahn Chah's teachings, I came across the answer to one of these questions, and then promptly lost track of it. But it was very clear, it made perfect sense, so I'm going to tell you the answer to the question, why was I born? The answer is to avoid being born again. I'll come back to this question of being born. But right now I'd like to talk about simplicity and sufficiency, because I think this was a core message in Ajahn Chah's teachings and a core example in his life. And it's so relevant to our lives today. One book of Ajahn Chah's teachings is a collection of similes, very short, pithy lessons that pack a very vivid punch. The title is In Simple Terms, and it's a free ebook available for download from the internet. So I would encourage you to look for that. It's a really, really wonderful little book. So one of these short teachings is called Doing the Math, and I would like to read it to you. The Dhamma is like doing math. There's multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. If we can think in this way, we'll be intelligent. We know the right time and place for things. We subtract when we should subtract, multiply when we should multiply, divide when we should divide, add together when we should add together. If we multiply every time, our hearts will die from the burden. In other words, we have no sense of enough. No sense of enough means no sense that we're growing old. Anyone, he continues, anyone with a sense of growing old is a person with a sense of enough. When there's enough, the words, okay, that's plenty, can make their way up. If there's not enough, that okay can't make its way up because we keep on wanting to take. We've never thrown anything away, let anything go, put anything down. We're always taking. If we can say, okay, we're at ease, that's enough. I have entered the stage of life where I do have a sense of growing old, although I don't think you need to have a lot of years behind you to have that sense. Little by little, I'm feeling the need to let go of things rather than acquire more things. I'm pretty sure I'll live the rest of my life without owning a smartphone. People at work talk about each new version of the iPhone and the new operating system, and I just... It has nothing to do with me. Not that I reject all technology. I really appreciate the ability to use the internet and to Skype with loved ones who are at a distance. But there's a great need in me to restore the simplicity that I think children enjoy, although it's so natural to them that they don't realize it. Sometimes we only appreciate good things when we glimpse the fact that we've lost them. We call that nostalgia. But things of true value need never be lost. They are our birthright, and we only have to rearrange our priorities, and they can be restored. To be able to recognize when we have enough is a very powerful, liberating perception. It's like waking from a trance, because we usually reach that recognition by becoming more mindful. We begin to question what we own, and perhaps decide to get rid of some of it, realizing that it's more of a burden than a benefit. I have an example in my own life. When I left a job that I had with an organization in Ireland, my co-workers and friends there gave me a very wonderful going-away present. It was a book of poems by a rather famous Irish poet. It was the first edition, and it was signed. And inside the book, they included the sales receipt, so I knew how much they paid for it. They said they gave me that so that I could insure it for insurance purposes, and I was like, oh my goodness. So I've had that book now for several years. It's sitting up on a bookshelf, and our house has been broken into a couple of times, and I'm like, is the book still there? The book's still there. That's good, And I realized it's nothing to do with the poems inside the book. It's just this object that has been invested with this artificial value. So I've decided I need to get rid of this book and maybe cash it in for something that I can do more valuable, more useful. So, but anyway, I know, and you should know, that just living more simply, while it is a wholesome step to take, not just for ourselves, but for the whole planet, because we're consuming its goodness and its life-giving properties at a rate that is unsustainable, that this is not enough to become finally liberated, to realize the purpose of our human birth. We also need to train our mind. Ajahn Chah said, the untrained mind is stupid. He says, sense impressions come and trick it into happiness, suffering, gladness, and sorrow. But the mind's true nature is none of those things. That gladness or sadness is only a mood coming to deceive us. The untrained mind gets lost and follows these things. It forgets itself. Ajahn Chah also compares our mind to a leaf. It is still as long as the wind doesn't blow. The wind is like our sense impressions, making the leaf and our mind flutter. The leaf, like the untrained mind, cannot help following the wind. But if we know fully the true nature of sense impressions, we will be unmoved. He says, we must train the mind to know those sense impressions and not get lost in them, to make it peaceful. Just this is the aim of all this difficult practice we put ourselves through. One of his short teachings from the book In Simple Terms compares our situation to that of an animal in a snare, or specifically a frog on a hook. When we are lost in our moods, swept away by our sense impressions and concepts, we are like a frightened animal caught in a snare, unable to get free, unable to do anything but wait for the hunter. Our sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, and ideas are like the snare. They tie us down. Or we're like a fish on a hook, waiting for the fisherman. Even more, Ajahn Chah says, like a frog on a hook, because a fish only bites the hook, but the frog swallows it and is caught deep in its gut. And yet, sense contact is the fount of wisdom also. Ajahn Chah tells of young monks, including himself, who only wanted peace to practice. He said that wherever he went, he was never satisfied. He wandered into forests, visited various teachers, heard many Dharma talks, but nowhere did he find satisfaction. He says that we search for peace in places where there are few sights, sounds, odors, or tastes, believing that living quietly will lead to contentment. But actually, how can wisdom arise where nothing else arises? We sit in meditation and let sounds disturb us. Ajahn Chah describes himself as a young man, being so disturbed by sounds, so he put beeswax in his ears to block them out. And he said what remained was a humming sound. He realized that he was still not peaceful, and that all the thinking and confusion didn't arise at the ears after all. It arose in the mind. This, he tells us, is the place to search for peace. I said that I would come back to the idea of being born, that we are born in order to avoid being born again. There is a Sanskrit term, bhava, which is often translated as feeling, emotion, mood, or even devotional state of mind. In Buddhist thought, bhava denotes the continuity of life and death, including reincarnation. and it is the 10th link in the chain of dependent origination, called their becoming. Ajahn Chah has some great things to say about bhava. He says that bhava exists wherever we believe things belong to us, whenever we are clinging to something. That is where we are born. As long as we can't let go, we're stuck in samsara, spinning around like a wheel. Ajahn Chah says that there must be a bhava, a sphere of birth, before birth can take place. For this reason, the Buddha said, whatever you have, don't have it. We should let it be there, but don't make it our own. Ajahn Chah challenges us to think about the place we were born and to ask if we really want to go there and be born again. We should look into this. He says of monks and meditators on retreat that the closer they get to the end of the retreat, the more they start preparing to go back and be born there. I can see the truth in this. We may start a retreat with a sense of purpose and excitement. It's different from our usual routine. Perhaps we anticipate having a major breakthrough in our practice. Perhaps we'll finally find enlightenment. But as we practice and endure this new routine of the retreat, the novelty wears off and perhaps we get bored or discouraged and we want another change. Even if it's back to our old routine, we always want something different. The wanting, this claiming something, no matter how elusive as ours, sets up bhava for us, sets up the sphere of becoming and of birth. So, bhava and being satisfied are very connected ideas. If we can be satisfied, if we can say enough, then we have our sense of growing old in Ajahn Chah's terms. We can't let go, we can let go of the superfluous, we can realize what is superfluous. We can answer the question, what can I take with me? Johann Sebastian Bach wrote a beautiful cantata called Ich habe genug, which means I have enough. He wrote it for the feast of the Purification of Mary, when the Holy Family took Jesus to the temple and the old man Simeon saw the baby, knew he was the Savior who was prophesied, and exclaimed, I have enough. He told God he was happy to die now because his life had been fulfilled by laying eyes on the Christ child. Bach's aria is extremely moving and beautiful, and there are numerous performances available to listen to and even watch on the internet. And if you're unfamiliar with it and like classical music, I really urge you to give it a listen. I'm just making the point that this idea of sufficiency crosses traditions and religions. One soprano, just as an aside, who performed it very famously, her name was Lorraine Hunt Lieberson, and she made this performance she made after she had been diagnosed with cancer and knew she was dying. And a critic gave an account of her performance in these words: perhaps her most intense performance was a harrowing setting of Ich habe genug, the Bach cantata, where she performed clad in a hospital gown and surrounded by the dangling tubes of a life support machine. With its theme of redemption through suffering, Hunt Lieberson's was an immaculately crafted, utterly committed recital. I take this as an indication that she could look her own death in the face and be able to say and to sing with all the conviction of Bach's beautiful words and music that she had enough. And interestingly, her husband, Peter Lieberson, who was a composer, was a committed Buddhist, which I only discovered. I want to end by sharing with you one more of Ajahn Chah's similes from In Simple Terms. He's addressing our stress when trying to cling to our hearing of the Dharma. It's a very reassuring teaching, comparing our calm mind to a tape recorder. He says, "The teachings I've given you today, if listening to this Dhamma has made your mind empty and still, that's good enough. You don't have to memorize anything. Some of you may not believe this. If you make your mind still and then allow whatever you hear to pass by, but you keep on contemplating, you're like a tape recorder. Whenever it's open like this, turned on like this, it's all right there. Don't be afraid that there won't be anything. Every time you open your recorder, turn on your recorder, everything's right there. External recorders can run down. After you've bought them, they can run down. But your inner recorder, when things go straight to the heart, oh, it's really good. It's there all the time, and it doesn't use up your batteries." Thank you for your attention. I wish that all beings might be peaceful and happy, that all beings might be free from suffering, and that all beings, especially those facing death, might be able to welcome it with a sense of enough. Testing?
Yes.
Yes, Ajahn?
Yes.
Oh, my nose is tasting. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Nice to see you. My talk today is going to be the first in a series of talks that we'll be giving on Venerable Xianyi. And these talks, I believe, will take us to the end of this year, the end of November, when the winter retreat begins. So we all felt that Venerable Xianyi is one of the most important contemporary figures in Chinese Buddhism, so it was definitely worth giving these talks. It's really so important to understand his life and his works, his scholarship, and his original thinking, in order to appreciate the very conditions that have brought us here today to Maba, and to understand how this opportunity arose for us to practice Buddhism in this Chinese Mahayana tradition. Because if I'm not mistaken, our own Master Jiru is in the tradition and lineage of Venerable Master Xianyi. Venerable Xianyi was born in 1906 into a peasant or farming family. In childhood, he was very sickly and had many periods of hospitalization. So the first noble truth of suffering is no stranger to him. His given name, family name, was Xianyi. And he grew up during the transition from the Qing dynasty under the first or the last Manchu emperor into China's Republican period. And that break occurred in 1911 when he was 5 years old. So for those reasons, opportunities for regular schooling were not very well established, especially in the countryside where he grew up. But despite that, Luchin excelled at all levels of schooling that he had access to. He was especially good at literature and writing. When he was old enough, Lu Qing's father sent him to learn traditional medicine, Chinese medicine, thinking that that would be a good livelihood for his son. In Venerable Inshun's words, I began to study Chinese medicine, and the phrase, medicine is the royal way to immortality, led me to revere the way of the immortals. So what this means is that he actually embarked on a 5-year involvement in what in the Western tradition would be called alchemy, medieval kind of magical tradition. He says, during this period I was thoroughly engulfed by the sorcery and witchcraft in the practice of way of spirit, paying great attention to individual longevity and mysterious phenomena. However, these experiences did have some good effect in expanding my vision and mission of searching for the truth. When his father found out about his activities, he disapproved and wanted his son to switch to teaching. So, under the influence of friends and fellow teachers, Lu Qing was introduced to Taoism and the writings of Lao Tzu and Chuang Tzu, as well as some modern works. And as a result, his religious views began to change. He says, after my faith in divine religion was shaken, I still did not let it go. I followed it haphazardly and returned to Confucian works, which I had previously studied. Confucianism was completely opposite to Taoism, which advocated hermit lifestyle and individualism. He says Confucianism stresses the need for mental and physical cultivation. Above all, it's concerned with a great political ideal. It is common, down to earth, takes human relationships seriously, and pays honor to rationality. It is the mainstream culture of China. He goes on, I agreed with their philosophies and even praised them, but they were unable to fill the emptiness in my unsettled heart. Others thought that I had become more pragmatic, but the fact is that I experienced an increasing emptiness. Venerable Inshun says that he was in this state of loss and emptiness when he discovered Christianity. He loved its socialized nature. From it, he says, he learned the true meaning of religious devoutness and a pure faith. Christianity, with its faith, hope, and love, had something that Confucianism and Taoism did not. But even though he practiced praying and attended revival meetings, he says he could never become a Christian because of the inconsistencies he perceived. For example, that believers would find salvation, but non-believers would be damned. I suppose the missionaries of the time were promoting views like this. So he couldn't believe in a loving God treating people in such a way. He says, the light I received from Christianity lasted less than 2 years and rapidly disappeared. The feeling of emptiness and hopelessness descended upon me just like a tiny ship in the midst of violent waves. I became emotionally depressed and at times perplexed and troubled. In this state of deep depression, I read anything to pass the time. By chance, I came upon Feng Meng Chen's preface to Chuang Tzu, in which he says, are not the texts of Chuang Tzu in fact forerunners of Buddhist thought? He says, my heart leapt and I began to inquire into Buddhism. However, it was difficult to get information on Buddhism and not easy to obtain copies of Buddhist scriptures. He visited monasteries and searched everywhere. At last, he managed to find and read a few books, including a Pure Land treatise, a commentary on the Diamond Sutra, a compilation of essential doctrines of the 5 Chan schools, and 2 or 3 Mahayana sutras. Understandably, he found these texts rather challenging and couldn't make much headway with them. But soon, in Venerable Inshun's words, he says, I came across Venerable Master Tai Shu's article entitled Steps of Learning Buddhism for the Lay Followers. and only then was I able to commence my studies from the simple levels. Luchin's parents died within 1 year of one another in 1928 and 1929. So, with nothing holding him to his home, at age 25, Luchin decided to enter monastic life at Putuo Monastery, where he received the Dharma name of Inshun. After joining the Sangha, Master Inshun neither took up residence in a meditative cloister nor devoted himself to learning rituals required for serving the laity. Instead, he enrolled in a new Buddhist study center set up by Master Taishu, the author of the introductory book on Buddhism that had been so beneficial for Luchin. In this school, Master Inshun advanced rapidly and soon was asked to give lectures himself. He especially proved himself expert at interpreting the philosophy of emptiness as taught by Nagarjuna. Soon, Master Taishu was sending his student around China to give lectures on the new Buddhist learning. To further understand the context for Venerable Inshun's accomplishments, I should say a little bit about his teacher, Venerable Taishu. It was he who brought Buddhism out of the cloisters and into the modern world. He revived the Mahayana commitment to working in the world and led others to reflect on current social issues. And during the national emergency of wartime, he encouraged Buddhists, even monks, to participate in the national defense. Even the rather frail Venerable Inshun responded to this call during the war years. Venerable Taishu was both a scholar and an activist, but with the emphasis on the latter. His student, Venerable Inshun, became the true monk scholar of the modern age. Venerable Inshun inherited a Buddhist legacy that was quite revolutionary. He unearthed the basic principles of the Buddha Dharma critically. He identified inaccurate assumptions made during the evolution of Buddhism, while he also revived and renewed teachings that suited the modern world. Venerable Inshun's research helped to bring forth the ideal of humanistic Buddhism, a leading mainstream Buddhist philosophy that has become very influential among contemporary Buddhists. I'll say more about this in a minute. His work also regenerated the interest in the long-ignored Agamas, the Chinese version of the Nikayas, the original discourses of the Buddha. And his ideas are echoed by the Theravadan teacher, our friend, Bhikkhu Bodhi. As a contemporary master, he is known as the mentor of Venerable Master Xianyi, who is the founder of the Tzu-Chi Buddhist Foundation, a wonderful disaster relief and aid organization, as well as several other monastics, such as Venerable Master Xianyi of Dharma Drum Mountain, gave a talk on him a few weeks ago, and Venerable Master Xingyun of Fo Guangshan, who are active in humanitarian aid, social work, environmentalism, and academic research. And we have a Fo Guangshan temple here in St. Louis, out in Maryland Heights. So what do we mean by humanistic Buddhism? And why has it flourished in our modern age? First of all, it is mainly, but not exclusively, seen as a Mahayana practice. And one of its exceptions, most notably, is Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, who belongs to the Theravadan tradition, but is very outspoken about politics as they affect the poor and when they increase the suffering of the majority of people. Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi has also set up Buddhist Global Relief, which is an organization to empower the poor around the world, helping them climb out of poverty and hunger through sustainable economic and agricultural practices. And some of you will have participated in his walk for hunger last summer when he came to visit us here. Venerables Taishu and Inshun are seen as early pioneers of humanistic Buddhism. It claims to encompass all of the Buddhist teachings from the time of the Buddha until the present day. Its goal is to live the Bodhisattva way, which is the commitment to help all sentient beings liberate themselves from suffering. Its focus is on issues of the world, rather than on how to leave the world behind, and on caring for the living, rather than the dead. The inspiration for humanistic Buddhism is said to come from the Lotus Sutra, with its optimistic belief in the core dignity of humans and their ability to achieve enlightenment. Another central tenet of humanistic Buddhism is the awareness of the interconnectedness of all beings, of our oneness, which is the basis for altruism. Venerable Taishu popularized the term Buddhism for human life. I'll try and pronounce the Chinese version, Ren Sheng Fo Jiao. The characters referring to human and life indicated his criticism of an emphasis during his preceding time, the late Ming dynastic and early Republican Chinese Buddhism's emphasis on spirits and ghosts and funeral services and rites. Hence, human and life. Taishu also used the term Buddhism for the human world, or humanistic Buddhism, terms that were largely interchangeable. Venerable Inshun used the term humanistic Buddhism to indicate a criticism against the deification of Buddhism, which was another common feature in Chinese Buddhism previously. Venerable Inshun and other disciples of Venerable Taishu settled in Taiwan when the Republican Army was defeated by the Communists under Mao Zedong, and brought these terms there where humanistic Buddhism became a very commonly used term. The related term Renjian Fo Jiao has also been translated as engaged Buddhism or socially engaged Buddhism, attributed mainly to Thich Nhat Hanh, who translated it from the Chinese into Vietnamese. In both Chinese and Vietnamese, the terms mean to emphasize the relief of suffering in the here and now. And some of you may be aware that the Buddhist Council of St. Louis every year holds a socially engaged Buddhism event. Venerable Inshun was a key figure in the exposition of Buddhism and thus humanistic Buddhism in Taiwan. Yet he was not very active in the social or political spheres of life. It was the younger generation of his students that carried this out. As I mentioned before, Xing Tun, Sheng Yan, Wei Chui, and Cheng Yan. These four are collectively known as the four heavenly kings of Taiwanese Buddhism. And they head what are known as the four great mountains or monasteries of modern Taiwanese Buddhism, namely Foguangshan, Dharma Drum Mountain, Chung Tai Shan, and Suchi. So, to conclude with a few words about Venerable Inshun's book, The Way to Buddhahood, which our following talks will be based on. I'll just paraphrase Venerable Inshun's preface to the Chinese edition, in which he says that Buddhism is a religion of reason and not just a religion of faith. The Buddha's teachings vary according to people's different capacities and preferences at different times and places. Although the teachings are interconnected, it can be difficult for beginners to integrate the different views. Venerable Inshun compares the experience to peering into a kaleidoscope. He also emphasizes that mistakenly taking only parts of the teachings is what led to Buddhism's narrowness and poverty in recent times. He acknowledges his debt to Venerable Master Taishu, who revealed the complete Buddhist teachings as methods for becoming a Buddha. Venerable Inshun tells us that while living in Hong Kong, he wanted to write a concise book on the path to Buddhahood, based on the discourses of Venerable Taishu and on Tsongkhapa's sequence of attaining enlightenment. He was not able to start this project until 1954, writing a few gathas or verses at a time to use in teaching a class in Taiwan. He then revised these short verses in 1957 and again in 1958, and began writing commentaries on them. He didn't finish the entire manuscript until the end of 1959. Upon publication of the first Chinese edition, he stated his objective as being to interconnect all Buddhist teachings and turn them toward the Buddha way. Venerable Inshun passed away in 2005 at the age of 99 or 100. We were very fortunate to have his learning, his teachings with us still. So thank you for your attention. I hope you'll be able to hear the following talks that develop our knowledge of his book, so that we may all grow in our learning and practice of the Bodhisattva way.